Welcome to the Freedom Club Podcast, where we discover the fight for freedom, fulfillment, passion, and purpose. Your host is Curt Mercadante, Gallup certified strengths coach, an agency founder who is dedicated to coaching individuals seeking to level up their life and their businesses. The Freedom Club is about unlocking your talents, turning them into strengths, and crushing your objectives. You can learn more at curtmercadante.com. Welcome to the Freedom Club.
Welcome to the Freedom Club Podcast. I'm your host, Curt Mercadante. It is Monday, April 16th, which means it's time for our Monday Motivator segment. Every Monday, I bring you a short burst of motivation to help you kick your week off on the right foot. Every Thursday, of course, is the interview segment in which I interview a business leader or some other all-around interesting person. And for today's Monday Motivator segment, I'd like to tell you a little story about my grandfather. Dominic Mercadante grew up in the Puglia region in southern Italy, and when World War I flared up, he went off to fight for Italy. During the course of the war, he ended up under siege as a POW in a town near the Austrian border. And as my dad liked to tell the story, at some point, all they had to eat and drink were rats and vermouth. My grandfather survived the war, and when he returned home, he found his family impoverished. Not speaking a word of English and barely having 2 pennies to rub together, he boarded a boat for New York City. And on the boat, he met a man who said he could try to get him a job at a piano factory. When they landed in America, my grandfather took a job at that factory and worked hard to teach himself English and save some money. A few years later, despite never having driven a trolley in his life, he took a job driving trolleys in New York City. And years later, when they switched to buses, he taught himself to drive those as well. He didn't let the fact that he had never driven a vehicle in his life stop him. Along the way, he met my grandmother and had 2 kids, my father and my Aunt Rose. And despite living on a trolley and bus driver salary, he saved his money and put my father through the University of Notre Dame. I tell you this story because my grandfather's story has always been an inspiration to me. He passed away when I was only a year old, but his story has been a big part of my life. You see, when people with 6-figure salaries come to me and tell me they're too fearful, too busy, or have too much adversity in their life to pursue their dreams, I think of my grandfather. He had every excuse in the world to fail. He could have avoided all the jobs he took in America by saying he didn't speak the language and didn't have the experience. But you see, my grandfather and my parents grew up in an era when we were allowed to fail. He didn't grow up in a security bubble. He didn't grow up learning to get trophies just for showing up. He didn't grow up in a society where we try to suck every last aspect of risk out of our lives, and cities close community pools and make it illegal for kids to climb trees for fear that someone might be injured. He grew up in an era when going for the win wasn't stigmatized as a bad thing, and in which he was allowed to sink or swim, allowed to fail, so he could learn, dust himself off, and get back in the game. So my message to you today is, rip yourself out of your security bubble. Tear yourself out of your comfort zone of misery. Don't be afraid to risk. Don't be afraid to fail. Because if you fail, at least you fail doing something you love instead of being stuck in your current rut. And I don't say all of this to compare my grandfather's adversity to yours, but I will say this. There are those who thrive despite their circumstances. There are those who thrive because of their circumstances. And there are those who use their circumstances as an excuse to not even get in the game. Which type of person are you? This has been the Freedom Club Podcast. I wish you a week filled with freedom and abundance. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.